Hey everyone, welcome back to all my listeners. Hope you're all having a great day so far. And if it's your first time finding me, thanks so much and welcome. Welcome to episode 14 of my third season. Today is Wednesday, August 4th, 2021. My name is Sonal Patel, and this is the Paint the Medical Picture podcast series. So we've turned the page on the calendar once again. I cannot believe it's already August. My goodness, our summer is almost over. Wow. Now, in my compliance tip today, I'm going to be diving into the latest comparative billing report, or CBR, for wound debridement. And I also have some fun and pop some sparkling rosé and welcome my very special guest, Terry Fletcher. And I round out today's episode with an inspiring quote on journeys from our 19th century American author, Harriet Beecher Stowe. If you've checked me out on LinkedIn, you know I'm all about compliance and protecting our physicians and valued healthcare professionals when it comes to the business of medicine. I hope this week with me brings you enough to take back to your organizations, to want to dive in deeper, to use my tips and best practices to ensure success. I hope this podcast will help you boost the quality of documentation capture and improve coding accuracy as you help your providers paint the medical picture. If you like what you're hearing, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss another episode. Please write in a review and kindly drop me a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to my podcast. I'd really love your support. And as always, a friendly disclaimer. Remember, I'm bringing you the news, current healthcare industry news, my compliance tips and recommendations based on my over 10 years of experience in front office, back end, coding, and billing for multi-specialty physicians, compliance, and auditing for both E&M and surgical operative reports. These are my opinions alone and are not to be construed as legal advice. So let's get into a very special Newsworthy that features my guest today, Terry Fletcher. I'm so excited to introduce her to all of you. Terry is a 30-year healthcare coding and reimbursement consultant, educator, and auditor based in California. With all of this experience, she holds a CPT and ICD-10 CM coding educator credential for the AAPC, AHIMA, ICD-10 University, the AAFP, McVeigh Seminars, Decision Health, and the NSCHBC. Terry also holds her bachelor's degree in economics, and she holds multiple certifications in coding and practice management. Terry is a previous AAPC National Advisory Board member, and she's a past AAPC-CA chair. Terry is also an editorial advisory board member for ICDmonitor.com, and she's the external coding and billing consultant for the American Academy of Family Physicians. Terry hosts her own weekly Codecast podcast that drops every Tuesday, and the monthly NSCHBC Edge podcast as well. She also hosts a weekly fun podcast segment where she talks about the NFL football and Pittsburgh Steelers and Steel City Underground podcast. Oh my goodness. Simply amazing stuff, Terry. Welcome and thank you so much. I'm honored to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm actually really pleased that you asked.
All right. Now, you know what, Terry? In my opinion, you are simply renowned in this industry, in this space of healthcare. Now, you've become one of my trusted colleagues, and we enjoy bouncing questions off each other and concerns as well. And again, it's all about integrity and doing what's right for our providers and healthcare professionals. Now, clearly from my bio introduction of you, you have multiple podcasts. It's crazy. I don't even know where you find the time, but it's just incredible. Now, your Codecast podcast is a staple for me personally, so thank you. And your blogs and your articles and consulting business continues to do very, very well, despite this topsy-turvy pandemic that's affected so many businesses across the country. So, what's been your biggest inspiration here? What is your why in creating and carving out this area of expertise for yourself?
Well, it's interesting because when I first started in healthcare, I actually was working when I was 17. I was going to college in Pennsylvania and I needed an extra job. I was waitressing. Everybody does that through college. And I was thinking, there was a sign from one of my customers and he said, "Hey, you want to come work for me? I work for a medical practice." And I said, "I don't have any experience." And he's like, "That's okay. I see you here. And if you can balance that many plates and trays on your arms and keep all these orders correct, that would be great." And I said, "Okay, well, I'm also in school." So and he goes, "You're 17 and you're in college already?" I said, "Actually, I'm in my second year. I graduated high school when I was 16. So he was just like, "Oh my goodness, yes, come work for me." So I did. And it was awesome. I just found out that I loved it, and I was able to give up my bartending job and just continue with my education. And then fast forward a little bit, just as far as creating the podcast, obviously fast forward a lot, almost 30 years, there was something going on. I'd say, well, it's probably going on a long time, but I noticed it about 5 years ago that there was, especially with the growth of social media, there was a lot of misinformation that was really being put out there when it came to coding, billing, reimbursement, regulations. We were just talking about something I posted today to LinkedIn on HIPAA versus
That's
HIPAA,
right.
the HIPPA versus HIPAA, and having the right acronym. And so just felt like I wanted to find a way to have a bigger reach or a louder voice. And I was already, on the seminar circuit, traveling almost 200 days a year, and that was winding down a little bit. But I just didn't feel like there was a lot of ways that everyone could hear what we were saying without attending something that they had to pay for. So I was actually doing a weekly podcast, as you mentioned, for Steel City Underground for the NFL. And it's called What the Football. So, and I asked my producer, I said, "Joe, this is what I want to do. What do you think?" Well, he laughed. He goes, "Seriously, coding?" And he's an IT guy. So he first thought I meant coding, like coding in a computer, writing code algorithms. And I said, "No, coding as far as CPT and ICD-10, diagnosis codes and procedural codes for medical." And he was like, "I don't think that's going to do anything, but why don't you try it? Who knows?" And so we created our little square of what our logo looks like. And back then you could only get a podcast. And I say back then, that was only in 2017. You could really only get a podcast on what they used to call iTunes, which is now Apple, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Spotify was just starting to allow it. They weren't really open to it. And then YouTube, but that's a separate platform altogether. And then now there's like 20, as you know, there's 20, 30, there's so many platforms you can be on, and we're on all of them. But it was just funny. So we tried it, and within 2 weeks, I was so excited. I had 100 downloads, and I was like, how did that happen? And that was just promoting on, LinkedIn and Twitter, and that was it. And here I am now, 234,000 downloads, 196 episodes. I'm averaging about 1,500 listeners a week. I've got 10 sponsors that roll in and out. And it's also generated a lot of business. So, and a lot of people also say, "How do you make money podcasting? Who pays you?" And as you know, nobody pays us.
Nobody pays us.
It's an act of love here.
Yes.
And so what I try to tell them is that it's reach. Being able to reach that many more people. I'm very big, apparently, in India and Afghanistan. Consistency every Tuesday. I even tag the phrase #TerryTuesday. And then credibility, making sure that you research, you are accurate, and any information that you're going to give your listeners or talk about, if you're not an entertainment podcast, is really authoritative. And one of the things I also like to do is I'm a solo podcaster. I do interview for NICHBC for their podcast, but my other 3, it's all solo. Nobody can talk back to me. It's great. So
You're in control. Yep.
I'm in control of the podcast. So that's kind of how I started out with it.
Well, I love it. I mean, that's just amazing. You're a pioneer. You've literally helped so many others along the way, right? I love that you are a trusted resource, and I love your motivation
Thank
because
you.
it simply did not exist. And because of you, so many of us have started our own podcasts with our own statements and missions and etc. But it's because of you. I believe you were one of the first for us in this particular space of healthcare.
That's what I
So
hear. And I don't know if you know this, but I've actually won 3 podcast awards for it. So
bravo.
yes,
No,
yes.
now we
So yeah,
know.
I was like, oh my
Wonderful.
goodness, that was kind of cool. When I first saw my first nomination 3 years ago, I was like, oh my gosh, I just got nominated. I checked out the company, podcastawards.com, and I was like, how did I even get in this space? So that was kind of fun. That was really fun to get an award on that. So
That's incredible. No, that's amazing. It's good to feel honored, right? I
it
mean,
is. It's
it's
very nice. And
incredible.
thank you
And
for your kind words. I appreciate that.
yeah, and you are appreciated around the world. Healthcare is a big thing worldwide.
It is.
So the messages that you're sending out have far reach. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
Amazing. Now, we all have a past and a history. And I know nothing sets out exactly as our dreams, right? When we're young, just like you stated, when we're younger, things definitely change. But if you can, I'd hope you could share some of the steps you took in your journey to get you here today.
Okay, well, this is kind of funny because I know a lot of people actually don't know kind of how most people know me as in the last 10, 15 years. I've been in the business over 30 years, and being an entrepreneur is very tough, especially because you have to start as an employee somewhere. And I did. I mean, obviously, I mentioned, going to college and working for medical groups. And my life goal, actually, I just remember sitting there with my mom when I was younger, and she was very big into soap operas. And she watched Young and the Restless in the 70s, got me hooked. I don't watch it anymore. No, who has the time, right? But I did watch it with her for a long time, and I wanted to be the CEO of Procter and Gamble because those were all the commercials in between. I thought, I can do this. And that's actually what I was going to college for. And then I switched to economics along the way. Well, that's a Bachelor of Science. Well, one of my professors, who was also my advisor, said, you also have a minor you're dealing with here and that back then it wasn't healthcare information, it was statistics. And I said, I just like the numbers. He goes, well, because it's a Bachelor of Science, he goes, you realize you only need 3 more classes, 2 biology, he goes, to get your RN. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he says, because back then you didn't have to also have clinical or a master's to get an RN, you just had to have a bachelor's degree. That was in the 80s. And so he goes, you want to take them? Then you'll have a double bachelor's. I'm like, sure, why not? Well, I'm an A student basically for everything, and I get weird if I even get an A minus. You guys probably can hear that about me, a little bit of a little weird there. But I got my first 2 B's. I was so upset because it was hard. Biology is not my thing, and so I was so bummed. But I passed them, and then they said, "Well, you need to take the board," and I took it, and I passed. But I was an RN who hated the sight of blood. That's not a good deal. And I couldn't do it. But I love the administrative side of healthcare. And I really, grew in the practice that I was working with and was helping them not only bill and code. And back then it was so different. We used typewriters and we used paper claims. And I mean, I'm really dating myself now. And then I got an opportunity to move out to California. I went to a seminar. It was a learning conference. And I kept answering questions from the audience that the speaker couldn't answer. But I was doing it in a very nice way, just to the side. I was like, okay, that didn't sound right. The speaker came up to me, who was actually the owner of the company, and said, do you want to work for me and come out to California? Well, this is where I was raised. And so I thought, yes, I want to get back to California. And so I did a little nursing for a little bit, but I went back to working on the administrative side in practices. I still keep up my RN, but again, I do not like I don't like what you see in ERs. I don't like the sight of blood. When the pandemic hit, I did get an email saying, do you want to come back in on the front line? And I am so busy teaching telehealth and so busy with the administrative how to stay afloat and all the provider relief funding. I feel that I am on the front lines in a matter of speaking, really trying to help to keep everybody compliant, afloat, and work through this pandemic. So I felt like I definitely did my job there. But that's how I got to do this. And just a side note, working for other surgical practices, I was at one for almost 10 years. The one thing about moving on to being an entrepreneur or consultant, and you probably have run into this, Sonal, is that first of all, you have to have somebody in your family that has health insurance. So luckily for me, my husband, he was a retired teacher now, but was able to always have us insured. So that's really good. And otherwise, you're paying a ton of money for insurance, and that, like a lot of people are out there right now. And so that's one of the biggest things you have to think of when you decide to go out on your own is, what about my health insurance? Steady income. What do you want to do? So I did it little by little. I did it part-time and on the side. They call it a side hustle now. And then it just grew from there when you couldn't have time for your own full-time job anymore, and you're getting more work on your own. And that's where we're at.
I mean, just incredible. I don't know if many people realize that you are an RN. In my opinion, that serves you very, very well. You have so much clinical acumen also, right?
I try not to say that I'm an RN. I'm not a practicing RN.
You're not a
because I don't want
practicing
to. I don't want.
RN,
Yeah.
right.
I don't want to ever give the impression that I'm a practicing RN, because that would be wrong. I see some people in government saying that they're a doctor, and we know that it's of education, not a real MD. And I just don't want to mislead anybody. So it's more the clinical background that I do have some insight there. Yes.
Right. And I think that's definitely served you very, very well on this other side of business. Absolutely. Because, when we're looking at our clinical documentation day after day, all of your insights from your educational background serve you very well.
Thank you.
In guiding practices, hospital systems, and providers. So amazing. And those were also some very good insights on the facts that being a consultant and business owner, might look very amazing on the outside. But again, that's based on all of your experience and decades of holding it. But it is very, very hard. So I'm glad you addressed that fact that you really have to take a deep look into your financial situation and see if you can do it, because obviously health insurance is very necessary and needed. So you have to be able to, put all your ducks in line and see if that is something that can be a possibility for you. So
It is, and
thank you.
I think a lot of people, I don't know if you get this question, but how can I do what you do? Or how can I be a consultant? I'm sure you get that a lot.
All the time.
All the time. And when I traveled more, I would get people come up to me and go, I want to do what you do. I just want to get out on my own. And as much as I think we want to encourage anyone who, wants to consider a consulting career, absolutely try and go for it. But it's a process. And one of the things being a consultant you have to have is experience. I was just talking to my daughter about this, who's a brand new middle school teacher, and just so excited. She's 26, she's got all her degrees in order now, but she's already put herself in for curriculum and admin. I'm like, Summer, can we just take a step back? I said, I'm just going to put it out there because I love you and I tell you the straight. I never tell you anything that isn't straight from the hip. I said, if you were an admin right now, administration, and somebody told me you were in charge of me and I'm a 40-year-old teacher that has, 15 years experience on you or more, I'd be like, yeah, I'm not listening to her. Right. I said, you have to have the experience to back up what you're telling people. The experience not only in the field, but also on paper. And so for those of your listeners that I think are really trying to break into the field, any kind of experience you can get, whether it be coding, billing, compliance, front office, medical records, oh my gosh, telehealth, anything that has to do with health information. Don't just pigeonhole yourself to coding. Make sure you open it up. And I just taught a webinar on interoperability and the Cures Act for information blocking. Well, I'm a coder. So you'd think, well, how does she know that? Because I research, because I do my due diligence, because I'm always on top of those breaking news stories and making sure I weed through them. And I think it's important that if you really want to diversify and get out there, as an entrepreneur at some point, you have to open yourself up to all aspects of healthcare. Not to be, I hate to say an expert, but to be credible in your information, you really need to stay in your lane for the most part, but really open yourself up to certain things that will help you, that can be a branch off of your core. And that's what I try to tell people. Your core is this, and then what can you branch out on that brings you back to that core but can enhance it?
Absolutely. That's terrific, sound advice. To be a consultant, you have to really be committed to being an avid learner. You have to want to continue to learn and grow to be able to provide the type of trusted advice to your clients. So what you stated is exactly right. That advice is exactly correct. You need to branch out and not just stay strictly in coding. For example, you have to be able to branch out and understand and research other areas of healthcare because your clients will come at you with a variety of questions. It won't simply be a straight up, well, how do I code this particular lap chole surgery today that became complicated? Their questions will in fact be a lot more overarching. So yeah, that's really great advice for my audience. It's terrific.
Thank you.
Now, all right, let's move on to my next question. Now, Terry, that I'm all about working smarter for coding compliance, right? And affecting change in this particular space of healthcare. But I want to hear your voice. Where do you see the medical coding profession heading with this current landscape of fraud, waste, and abuse numbers that are simply sky high? And the facts that there's simply more and more artificial intelligence or AI software products that are out there too. And they're at the ready to do so much of our basic coding. So what advice can you give? Or if you can look into that magic California crystal ball that you might have, what do you see happening? What do you see trending next for certified medical coders?
Well, I think the biggest thing, and this is a great question because, you gave me some insight of what we were going to talk about. And I was really pondering this as I was out of town the last couple of days. I think one of the things that I see is that I don't think everyone really understands the definition of compliance. I think that when we go into practices and we ask, can I see your compliance manual? They look at us like we are from outer space, because I would say, and you could clarify for your clients, most people don't have one. They may have one for OSHA. So, your basic as far as, sanitization and that kind of thing. But as far as having one for front desk, back office, billing office, coding office, and even for the physicians, a lot of practices don't have that. So I think until you can answer that question and understand the definition of compliance, which in a nutshell means here are the rules in black and white, and are you following them? If you're not following them, what is the penalty or what is the consequence? And is that enforced? Then I think it's really tough to move forward from that and know what's coming in the future. Even offices that say that they have a compliance manual, and I review it and look through it, I say, okay, well, I'm here to audit your records and I'm having a problem with this one physician, and I notice that you have a compliance rule in place, but this doctor has not been called out for their non-compliance, and they don't suffer any consequences. And then when they usually come back and say, well, that doctor's the compliance officer. I'm sorry. But it is kind of funny sometimes, because the ones that aren't doing it are usually the ones that are the compliance officer. But so you can't even help but laugh at that. But then you just get a lot of feedback saying, the staff is concerned for their job. They don't want to be mean. They don't want to, step on toes. But then what happens a year or two when you get requested for a formal audit, not just you being proactive and doing one internally, externally, and you're asked to send back money. And now you're a target of OIG or CMS. And, how many, I know on LinkedIn, that's where Sonal and I actually met, everyone. So social media can be very powerful. But you probably follow the OIG like I do, the blog that they have up there. And every day, sometimes several times a day, we see posts about how many physician practices, physicians, pharmacists, entities are getting tagged for non-compliance and fraud and abuse and waste. And it's sad, really. Every time I see it, and I try not to eye roll, but I'm just like, again, how do you not realize you're going to get caught?
Right.
And why are you doing this? But one of the biggest things right now is telehealth. And telehealth scares the heck out of me because it's been a necessary platform during a pandemic that some days we think it's going to end soon, and some days with a new variant, we're not sure. And I think we're going to have a long-term effect of it either way for the next couple of years. And I love telehealth when it's needed and when we try to reach patients that can't get into the office or it's not safe for them to come in. But the offshoring companies have, you know, tagged into certain telemarketing schemes, and we have doctors have found a way to really abuse the system, again, which will bankrupt Medicare. And we've just had so much abuse because it's just too free for all. And so we still have practices that never read the FAQs from CMS from the 1135 waivers and billed out office visits when there was audio only telemedicine, telehealth. And it's interesting when people talk about compliance and really trying to develop a culture of compliance. You have to know what it means first. And it is really up to us as health information professionals to make sure that we know what the rules are, to put them in writing, and I'm talking white paper, and then making it available to everyone to review, sign off on. But compliance also means a consequence. If you don't adhere to these rules, then there will be a penalty. And I really hope that practices who are developing a compliance model or plan enforce those penalties. It's kind of like chastising a child that doesn't think you're ever really going to do it. You know, you keep saying, if you keep touching that, you know, if you keep doing that, you're going to be grounded, or you're going to, you know, I'm going to slap that hand away or do whatever, and then you never do it. That means that child is going to continue the behavior. And that's the same thing in healthcare right now. The behavior is going to continue if you're not caught. So this is where I think really developing what that is, what it means, and looking forward into how you can, and I hate to use the word penalize, it's really a consequence. If you don't do this, then this is what's going to happen. And it just means being accountable for your actions. And everybody has to be accountable. Even us as independent consultants, we have accountability to our clients, believe me, because if we don't have the accurate information, they'll be the first ones to let us know. But as far as coders, I think we're still way off in the AI department. I do. I think that they're really focusing more now on trying to have good information versus click and paste information even when it comes to coding. I see it some places, but there's so much missed. I just did a huge audit for a facility in Boston, and they use the artificial intelligence, or I'm trying to remember what they called it. It was a brand new platform for computer coding, and they call it CAC, computer access coding. And it was terrible. They missed probably, I would say I reviewed 120 records, and they missed about $130,000 in charges because it only picks up certain things. It doesn't look at the whole report for what it is. And that sometimes or most of the time, that can only be done by actual coders.
Exactly. I mean, you have so many insights, Terry. So many insights. Why don't I pick up off of that AI? So I get phone calls and emails from so many young coders who are a little bit threatened, scared by this new type of technology, software. Now, I don't necessarily think it's that new. There have been encoder types of software for some time. The computer assisted types of coding have been around since I started. So you're absolutely right. That type of product is simply gleaning off of the surface, right? It doesn't have the ability to do the actual human critical thinking side of analyzing a medical record. So I tend to agree with you. I think we have some time to wait to see if these AI types of software products are actually going to improve and then accelerate, and be able to do a little bit more in the future. But so I think the coding profession is definitely here to stay. That's what I tell all of the new fresh coders. You have nothing to be worried about. There's a lot of competition out there though, so keep working hard and keep reading and practicing, because there are plenty of jobs out there, plenty.
There are, and one of the things I try to relate to staff that is worried about that computer coding and taking their job away, that's why it's always important, as we mentioned, to expand your knowledge. Mm-hmm. One department that doesn't get near enough credit, it's actually underrated, is the collection department and the AR department. Oh my goodness. I don't know how those people survive. They're kind of grumpy sometimes because they need access to coders and access to people who understand how to navigate their CPT book. Mm-hmm. But one of the things, for example, I offer a membership to clients to ask coding questions. And I got one yesterday that was interesting. And it was clear that the person that sent it to me, she's not a coder. She was an administrator and said, can you help us do an appeal on this? But the insurance company denied the claim on a repair of a aneurysm, saying that they could not, that they billed too many times a 34713, which is a greater than 12-inch sheath access on both sides of the legs of the femoral artery. And clearly in CPT it says, it was clear. It says you can bill for this up to 2 times. You can bill for it for each site bilaterally. It even went on the direction and said, don't use a 50 modifier because it's an add-on code. So you have to bill it twice and then put your modifiers on for laterality. But it was interesting because that's kind of what computer coding reminds me of, is like you said, it's surface. It's just taking the basics and then running with it instead of really looking at the process and the application of the codes in the individual record. And that's why some of us have specialty credentials and we're specialty coders, because we know what to look for. And so some of you out there that are orthopedic, you know what you can do if you're spine, you know when you can bill for instrumentation and, extras. I'm primarily cardiology, but I'm also GI and orthopedic as well. And I know when there's certain things just by looking at the note. I could just look at it and I just know what they're missing. And so that's why we're here, because we can look at it. And I think that, and we can extrapolate codes that a computer can't. They don't always know the nuances or the direction of CPT, the parenthetical notes. And I think that's where there is, I don't want to say a fail with it, but maybe, what do you think? An assumption that it's the end all. Mm-hmm. For example, have you seen that movie? Was it Hidden Figures? With the women? I love that movie.
Great.
The African American women that were part of the NASA program. I love that movie. I've seen it like 4 times. And the IBM was just being introduced in the early 60s. I think it was mid 60s. And they were so concerned because they were all going to lose their job because now the IBM was, spitting out these numbers. Right. Very similar concept is what everybody's afraid of. Yes. But what happened in the movie and was reality is that they weren't getting the calculations quite right because the humans had to put in some information that the computer couldn't read. And, and they actually had to bring in a human to get, I think it was John Glenn, up to the, back in from the space station or wherever he was going. Otherwise, it just wasn't going to happen. And so I think of it in those terms, that there will be a human connection. It's just like garbage in, garbage out. If it's bad, it's good because we also have to put in the information, and a computer can only do really surface stuff to a point.
Well said. That's a perfect comparison, because we are needed to provide those extra details. Absolutely. That software product just cannot do it all. Absolutely cannot. I agree with you completely. And all of your insights on compliance also spot on, accurate. We need our providers, we need our practices to be fully on board and embrace that culture of compliance from the very, very start. So we don't see this tremendous aftermath that we're seeing today in the current landscape where there's just so much fraud, waste, and abuse out there. So I think that's what you and I do all the time with our clients is we try and have them implement proactive compliance. Even though they've been around for 20 years, we're still trying to teach them that you have to improve, edit, revise your compliance programs yearly, when there are these massive types of changes that we all just went through in January 2021, right? And of course, we were struck with the pandemic. So, of course, we had to adjust rather quickly a year and a half ago with all of the telehealth and telemedicine services that you were talking about. And I know you and I were so active a year and a half ago with all our webinars and talking to everybody left, right, and center.
112 I have taught on telehealth. And it was funny because, and oh my gosh, I know Sonal was teaching it as well. And we couldn't get requests fast enough, especially because of all the FAQs kept changing.
Changed every third day.
I was teaching, oh my gosh, I was teaching a telehealth for the California Health Information Association. I'm on the call and my phone is blowing up and I always turn my phone over, but somebody was relentless. Even somebody, when you're on silent, they can still get to you apparently. And I'm like, what the heck? And so then they're trying me through email and I'm like, trying not to be distracted. I turn it over, and as soon as I was teaching something changed. I was on the actual telehealth webinar and something changed. I'm like, okay, let's go back to slide 13. And just so you know, as of today, so it's very fluid. But yeah, like you said, compliance and just trying to keep everybody accurate and straight arrow and really up to date in all the information is really kind of, it's tough because like we say in our disclaimers in our webinars, it's accurate today. We don't know about tomorrow, but today it's good. So,
So true. Oh my gosh. All of our webinars got like 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 hits, but it was ridiculous. I'm like, it's done now. It's outdated, so we had to keep changing it, but
I had somebody, I laugh when I get this email. I get somebody that says, hi, Terry, I have a workbook from you and you said in 1997, I'm like, whoa. I probably did.
It was really accurate.
Yeah. Can we come back to the current year? That was 24 years ago. Yeah. Let's move forward. I just laugh when somebody says, well, you said 5 years ago. I probably did because 5 years ago that was accurate. And so, it's just funny because I actually feel bad for some of the coders out there that tell me, and I really am sad they tell me this. They said, yeah, our practice won't buy us CPT books that are current. We have to use one every 2 years. I'm like, what? Now that may work for ICD-10 because they publish them for free. The CDC publishes and the AHA and all of that. And Medicare too, they publish the file. But CPT is a profit margin for the AMA. And so we have to pay for our codes. Even though we get the updates, you still need your book because of all the parenthetical direction. But it makes me sad when even staff are only as good as they're trained, and they're only as good as what they have access to. And if you don't have access to current information, that's just going to sabotage your job. So
absolutely. And again, that points to, embracing that culture of compliance, embracing the budget for compliance, right? If you want your business to survive, you need to have a budget for your coders to have those books. They need those current books year after year. So absolutely. Wow. It's so good talking to you. Wow. What a good laugh. We could talk for
hours. I know. We have to move on. I know.
Okay. We have to move on because it's almost time to go. My goodness. Okay. But now for my last question, I know, because I know you, I know you've done so much already. You've given back so much already, but I'm still curious to know, what are you still striving for, Terry? Where am I going to see you in the next 5 years?
Well, I think I'm going to do a true crime podcast. No, I just love true crime podcasts. No, yes. I know. Isn't that funny? I'm writing a couple books right now. One is on what I call the solopreneur, entrepreneur. So Just really trying to give, and in the healthcare space, so trying to give some insight back to
Nice.
kind of mentioning what I've mentioned before, just steps on how to make that work. But I love writing. I love writing, not just
I
articles, but
love your
books.
writing style.
Thank you. And so I'm really in the process of doing some writing when I have the time. That's tough. But I've just started really getting into some of this true crime stuff that's not too obnoxiously gross. So I'm into scary. I'm not into gross. So, but I was just reading a book on it too, and I don't know. Some of it just interests me. So, either that or some fiction, crime novel, something like that. Actually, a little bit out of the healthcare space, but just keep working and plugging away, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to diversify and see where it leads.
Well, good. I'm excited. I'm glad you're branching out. You're going to do something fun, something outside of healthcare as well.
A
So
little bit,
that's
yeah.
exciting. That's definitely exciting. Amazing. Now, Terry, I know I don't have the same listeners that you do. So if you could tell my audience where you can be found.
Oh, okay. So, as Sonal mentioned, the Codecast podcast drops every Tuesday. It's like clockwork since November 1st, 2017. And you can find that on all platforms. My website is terryfletcher.net. And we have all kinds of different options there. We do have a membership service. If you have coding questions, you can ask unlimited coding questions for a yearly fee. And we have quite a few members with that. And then ICD-10monitor.com, I'm one of their guests pretty often, twice a month, for their Talk 10 Tuesday segment that they do. We go live and then it's switched to a podcast later on because it's recorded. And then for those of you that are football fans, Still City Underground, I do a What the Football, in season. So it's when this football season starts. And actually my first one, I'll have an article in my first one because we have preseason games coming up. Finally, we didn't have it last year, but first week in August, the Steelers are playing the Cowboys in the Hall of Fame game. So you'll hear me on that one as well. So I know that sounds silly, but I've been doing that one for 10 years. So I love it.
I love it, Terry. Amazing. Well, I'm going to put everything in my show notes so my people can find everything. So I'm just, again, honored that you came on my podcast. I'm so happy to have spoken with you today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and to the listeners out there. There's so much that we can do out there in healthcare. And, I just love being able to connect with you and having Sonal as now one of my trusted colleagues and friends. And there's space for all of us. I know some people are like, oh, you can't do that. You can't do this. Yes, you can. Sonal's podcast is different from mine because I'm solo podcaster. And there's all kinds of different ones too. One of our friends, Jennifer, she has one, McNamara. And there's a space for all of us. So just keep widening your space, widening your mind to what is an opportunity in healthcare. For those of you that like social media, did you know there's now social media managers in healthcare? If you like telehealth, be a telehealth facilitator. There's ways to go in healthcare that could be just fun for you. So open your mind to that space. And thank you again for having me.
I'd love it, Terry. Thanks so much. And now it's time for my best practice tips in Trusty Tip. A comparative billing report, a CBR, has been issued for wound debridement services by CMS. It was just released at the end of July, so many practices should be receiving it now in the month of August. It's CBR number 202107. That's the 7th CBR for the year to date. Now, the focus is on rendering providers nationwide that submitted claims for wound debridement services, which includes our CPT codes 11042, 11045, 11043, 11046, 11044, and 11047. Now, these are the providers who have already been identified with vulnerabilities in their billing patterns, and they should be aware that the CBR contains an analysis of billing practices across geographic areas and serve as an educational tool for possible improvement in billing and ensuring compliance. Now, specifically, the wound debridement services vulnerability is quantified in the CBR. And that quantification is according to the 2020 Medicare Fee-for-Service Supplemental Improper Payment Data Report that reflects a 9.1% improper payment rate for Medicare Part B, quote, ambulatory procedures, skin, end quote, which represents over $169 million. Now, a whopping 95.7% of this improper payment rate is attributed to, of course, insufficient documentation. So it's critical to understand that a CBR does not indicate you are going to get an audit. Now, I've mentioned this in previous podcast sessions where I've disclosed the other 6 CBRs in my Trusty Tips or in my Newsworthy, but be mindful that this phrase is directly coming from the MACs that issue the CBRs. So please take that with plenty and plenty and plenty of grains of salt, because more directly, consider this to be your notice, your warning that you are being looked at closely. Now, however, there is value to these particular CBRs, right? So to providers, it's supposed to serve as a tool, an educational tool to look at your billing patterns against your peers. Now, there's also value in the facts that specific coding guidelines and billing information will be further detailed. Now, the CBR informs providers whose billing patterns differ, again, from those of their peers. Now, the desired behavior here is to capture proper and compliant documentation for services, right? So this means that the documentation must support the proper use of wound debridement codes, and therefore CMS and CPT guidance must be followed. So I'm going to try and help out here because I love wound debridement services. It's very tricky, but hopefully I can outline some facts of how to do this correctly. Now, the required elements must include, and this is taken straight from the CPT book for 2021, quote, wound debridements are reported by depth of tissue that is removed and by surface area of the wound. These services may be reported for injuries, infections, wounds, and chronic ulcers. When performing debridement of a single wound, report the depth using the deepest level of tissue removed. Now, in multiple wounds, sum the surface area of those wounds that are at the same depth, but do not combine sums from different depths, end quote. Now, again, like I mentioned, it's one of my favorite types of coding, but it is tricky to measure and measure. So the CBR has trends over time that I want to go over. Like the CBR trends over time, the total number of beneficiaries who had claims submitted with CPT codes for subcutaneous wound debridement. Now, the CBR also trends claims that were submitted with CPT codes for muscle and fascia wound debridement for the total number of beneficiaries. And finally, there's a trend over time for the total number of beneficiaries who had claims submitted with the CPT codes for bone wound debridement. And the CBR digs even further into the data. So in the analysis and results portion of the CBR, it quantifies that there were 27,882 rendering providers with combined allowed charges of over $332 million for providers that submitted claims for wound debridement services. Now, also, the CBR does provide the date parameters or scope for these claims, and that's from February 1st of 2020 through January 31st of 2021. Now, this report is an analysis of these following 3 metrics. Their metric number 1 is for the percentage of claims billed with add-on codes. Their metric number 2 is for the percentage of allowed charge amounts from those add-on codes. And finally, their third metric is for the average number of units per claim with add-on codes. So let's get into the rationale for why providers are going to be receiving this CBR. First, CMS has already identified you as quote unquote significantly higher compared to state or national averages or percentages in any of those three metrics I just mentioned. Like you're going to be greater than or equal to the 90th percentile. And then second, CMS will identify that your billing is, number one, significantly higher compared to either state or national averages in any of those three metrics. Again, number two, that you've had at least 5 total patients with claims submitted for those CPT codes 11042, 11045, 11043, 11046, 11044, and 11047. And finally, third, CMS is identifying that in your billing, you've had at least $1,500 in total allowed charges for those same CPT codes. So now let's get into those code descriptions so this all makes a bit more sense, right? This is very complicated. So the CPT code 11042 is defined as debridement, subcutaneous tissue, includes epidermis and dermis if performed, first 20 square centimeters or less. And remember that the physician surgically removes foreign matter and contaminated or devitalized subcutaneous tissue. Again, that includes the epidermis and dermis. And it's going to be caused by injury, infection, wounds, and chronic ulcers. But be mindful, you must be excluding burn wounds. Now, using the appropriate surgical instrument, the physician excises the affected subcutaneous tissue until viable bleeding tissue is encountered. And a simple topical antibiotic is placed on the wound, or a simple gauze dressing is applied to the surgical site. Now, the second CPT code is 11045, and that's defined as each additional 20 square centimeters or part thereof, list separately in addition to the code for the primary service. Now, again, this is that add-on code, right? It's the add-on code for CPT code 11042 that I just described. Now, this is another big tip from me. Remember, when reporting debridement of a single wound, the deepest level of tissue removed determines the correct code. The debridement of multiple wounds at the same tissue level may be added together to determine the appropriate code, but different tissue depths should not be added together for code selection. And according to the AMA, the debridement of skin, again, that's your epidermis and dermis, is reported with the codes describing active wound management. That's in our CPT code 97597 or 97598. Now let's move on to the third CPT code here. CPT code 11043 is defined as debridement, muscle and or fascia, which includes the epidermis and dermis and subcutaneous tissue if performed, first 20 square centimeters or less. Now here, the physician surgically removes necrotic muscle and or fascia, and again, including the epidermis and dermis and subcu, because the muscle is underneath our skin, correct? So you're going underneath. So you have to approach it from the epidermis on top first. So the physician uses the appropriate surgical instrument, a scalpel, to excise the affected tissue into the muscle layer. Now, this dissection is continued until viable bleeding tissue is encountered. And depending on the wound size, closures may be immediate or delayed, and the wound may be packed open with gauze and require immediate or delayed reconstruction. Now, the next CPT code is 11046, and that's defined as each additional 20 square centimeters or part thereof. Now, this is that add-on code, right, to CPT code 11043 that I just described, and you should follow that same big tip from 11042 and 11045. Now, let's move on to CPT code 11044. That's defined as debridement, bone, includes epidermis, dermis, subcutaneous tissue, muscle, and or fascia if performed, first 20 square centimeters or less. Now, of course, here, again, we're going right underneath. So you're cutting through the skin, you're cutting in through the muscle, and you're getting to that bone. So the physician surgically removes foreign matter and contaminated or devitalized bone. Again, that includes that epidermis, dermis, subq, muscle, and fascia caused by injury, infection, wounds, or chronic ulcers. And be mindful again, do not include your burn wounds here. There are separate codes for that to excise the affected tissues into the bone. Now, depending again on the wound size, our closure may be immediate or delayed. And the wound may be packed open with gauze again and require immediate or delayed reconstruction. And finally, our CPT code 11047 is defined as each additional 20 square centimeters or part thereof. This is that add-on code, right, for the one I just described, 11044. Now, another big tip from me, always remember to follow our CPT coding guidance, especially when it comes to this type of tricky debridement coding. Like you can code also each additional single wound with different depths. You can also code with modifier 59 for additional wound debridements. And you can also code multiple wound groups with different depths. So this CBR should have all of us performing wound debridement services really buckle down and self-audit whether we received this particular CBR in the mail or not. Now's a great time to dive deeper into your own data, beat the payers to the punch, and pay attention to what you are sending out the door. Is it really in compliance? But by painting all of these fine details of the medical necessity into the medical picture, a provider's documentation will support the code selection by its very definition. The medical necessity will be supported for a certified medical coder to then abstract codes with accuracy. And finally, in this week's inspiring quote in Spark is from the great American author Harriet Beecher Stowe. Never give up, for that is just the place and time that the tide will turn. So very true, right? I think this is a perfect quote that reminds us, inspires us. We must be brave enough to keep going, keep persisting, keep persevering. Take steps in our journey, knowing that journey sees struggle and hardship. Knowing that with each challenge, we may be confronted with temporary stress. But we must be able to see the bigger picture, knowing that with our courage, the tides are sure to turn. I am happy Harriet Beecher Stowe's spark still burns brightly in all of us today. So that wraps up today's episode. Please go out and make this a great day, an incredible week for yourselves. Aim a little higher, do a little more, and give back in any way you can in 2021. There's so much each one of us can do. And as always, I appreciate you all diving into today with me. And if you want more information from me, go ahead and follow me on LinkedIn. I'll leave links to everything in the show notes below. Please continue staying safe and healthy. I know I'm fully vaccinated, but continuing to mask up and do my part when I'm traveling to other states. So please practice safety for one and all during our collective life in the time of coronavirus, seemingly never-ending life of coronavirus, right? Thank you so much for listening in on today's very special episode, and I hope every week with me brings you closer to helping your providers paint a masterpiece. See you next Wednesday.